On the 22nd of August, Bungie will showcase Destiny 2 The Final Shape. This is the expansion, it is the big culmination of Destiny's decade-long arc, and for some reason, Destiny players do appear to be, maybe more so than ever, actually quite angry and disappointed. And one of the perks of my job is, whenever I'm not sure what's going on, I got a research team to throw at the problem. So today, together, we're going to learn exactly what has made Destiny 2 players so disappointed, and why for many people, the August State of the Game post essentially took the disappointment they had after Lightfall, and then sealed it in for freshness. Okay, to go by the headline numbers, of course we're overwhelmingly negative for recent Steam reviews, and we are mostly negative for overall Steam reviews for the most recent expansion, which is bad. We, of course, August 3rd have the State of the Game post, which summarizes where the game is right now ahead of the expansion. Now, it is, of course, mediated by how they're unable to talk fully about their upcoming content plans, but what they did is they detailed everything they've got to change in the next while. And because of that, people have been quite furious. Again, if you're to take a look here at these reviews, you see the negative reviews. Most recently, though, you do see a spike after the 3rd of August. So this is people reviewing based on their disappointment. We have major community members like Mr. Kakis here with how Bungie pissed off the entire Destiny 2 community in one day. We have seen video essay after video essay summarizing what people see as being a decline in the game's quality of service, while simultaneously having an increase in the game's monetization, and sometimes via means that do to people feel rather sneaky. How did all this happen then? Well, there's a lot of people who play Destiny. Some really love the story and the world, PvE, loot, PvP, and fashion. Each one of these groups have got their grievances, and a post like this should speak to all of those things. But what happens when what you've got to tell people isn't exactly what they wanted to hear? I'm going to take you through some of the highlights here. Bungie overall thinks that the story's in a healthy place going into the final shape, and that while Lightfall was initially messy, collectively, the narratives will pay off in a way they couldn't have in a single campaign, and this is a framing that I think is somewhat supported by what some of the larger lore content creators for this game are saying as they reflect on the writing of Lightfall, where it's like there are some positives, but a lot of it is a very big formatting error, a experiment that went very wrong. Basically, Witch Queen was awesome, and that was from Bungie's perspective because they chose a tone and an aesthetic, and they went in whole hog. They didn't understand that actually, no, people liked the tone and the aesthetic they chose. So whenever they decided to go 80s action movie and go full into that for the penultimate big leap of their story, that's obviously not what people wanted. They wanted something that felt as serious and meaningful as Witch Queen. Another ongoing issue has been the game's stability. They say that is increasing through fixes, and there will be more work throughout Season 23. They said there are plans in Season 22 to find a way to fix the game's content problems, with new ways to experience key in-game moments in Destiny 2's history ahead of the final shape. Of course, in a game like this, getting access to all of the content can actually be rather tricky. And they also teased that the Season 22 and Season 23 cycle will feature entirely new kinds of seasonal gameplay to add variety. I think back to whenever I was very much made happy by the seasons, and it was like Season of the Drifter, added in some new gameplay modes. I really enjoyed that, so that actually does sound like a good thing. They're talking about the implementation of a Fireteam Finder in Season 23, which will allow for solo players to run endgame content at Raids 2, kind of opening that up. I know a form of group finder, party finder. People have been asking for this since day one of Destiny 1. I guess it's finally happening. Now, there was much promised for the final shape here, and that's going to be tricky. They don't have concrete things that'll tell people, hey, this is exactly how it will be better, right? Instead, we have promises, and promises are not particularly effective when you've already lost trust. So they did talk about a whole suite of structural changes that they're making to the game's progression, to bounties, and story-wise, saying the final shape and its raid will provide a climactic conclusion to the Light and Darkness saga before they look to what comes ahead. Of course, people won't really be able to believe that given how Lightfall has actually been and the trust that has been lost. But of course, the main problem with any post like this is trying to please everybody, right? They obviously did fall short. That's why the community has been so unhappy. And this is the thing. They started to talk frankly about their resource allocation and what that actually means for the game's future content. And this is absolutely not what their community wanted to hear. But maybe you want to hear about this. Ooh. And that is what's going to bring me to PvP and The Pale Beyond. Of course, we're a game studio. We made a game, The Pale Beyond. You can check out the Steam link down below. We're currently in the 90s with our scores. Very chuffed about that. And if you'd like to support our team, you can pick up the Pale Beyond art book and also the collector's edition vinyl. And all of that on store.bellular.games. It is the best way to show your support, and you will get, I mean, honestly, some really sick stuff from our art team. Okay, let's talk about PvP and Destiny 2. So, obviously, it follows on from Halo. A lot of us loved Halo PvP, myself included. With Destiny, though, it's been problematic. People have been adamant that they need to see more. I think it's absolutely fair that they've been adamant about that because the support for Crucible has been really bad. There is going to be a new map. That's what Bungie confirmed. A new map this month, along with a 6v6 relic mode, which is acquiring relic weapons, scoring kills with them, a new gunplay-focused checkmate mode with a slower time to kill and less special ammo, and a new emblem, as well as plans to bring a 2018 map into the live game in Season 23. And that's with 2 new modes going in the test environment for the game itself. Now, Bungie know that this is not enough to make people happy, right? And because they know that, they try to explain why it's the case. I'm just going to read for you what they said. We know our hardcore PvP players want more maps, fewer cheaters, and an ever-evolving meta that feels good to compete in. The most frequent feedback that they have is that there's not enough content, especially maps. To set expectations, our studio structure is built to support more overarching updates to PvP like the ones above, rather than focusing exclusively on maps. When we do focus our resources on building new Crucible maps, it comes with the trade-off of multiple teams' bandwidth to work on that contributes to a variety of experiences that the players hold dear, like new story or exotic mission content, core activities, and things like that make up the foundation of new seasons. So basically, if you have a new seasonal gameplay mode, right? I've forgotten the thing in the Season of the Drifter, but basically it had a bunch of triangles in it and it was cool. That will be done, and that'll take the same, that'll eat up the same team members' days as, say, a PvP map would. So that essentially is the issue. It's not like they have a PvP map team that can always be working on maps. Now, in a case like that, when you're backed into the corner, a lot of people, myself included, would say, well, what if there's a bunch of really good maps from Destiny 1 that people would probably like to play? Just put them in 2. To that, they say that bringing back reprised maps often involves extensive porting to the latest version of Destiny 2, which requires additional resources to ensure that maps work correctly for the multiple game modes and playstyles for years to come. So in short, basically, they're saying, if we make a bunch of PvP maps, you're not going to get other sorts of content, right? And that basically means there's a disconnect, because a lot of the player base sees new maps as a core thing that they need for PvP. But for Bungie, they just don't really think they can do that with the resources available, so instead they're focused on giving PvP players newer experiences. Basically, way higher bang for the buck if they do different modes and playlists and that sort of thing within the existing maps. I mean, this is totally reducing something to the point of absurdity, but I think you can get the point. Ever played a really fun custom game mode, like custom rule set in Halo 3? Right? It doesn't take people that long to build those, and you just go and play it. That's a lot easier than making a whole new map, essentially. Which fundamentally does mean for the PvP players, it's saying, yeah, we cannot justify the resources to make you a new map. Which, basically, when push comes to shove, says, you're not worth a new map. And they may not think that's what they're saying, right? Because from their perspective, they've got to keep everything alive and healthy. But to somebody who likes PvP, it's saying, sorry, your cell in the spreadsheet is too small for us to give you nice things. You don't get nice things. And that foments a sense of betrayal, right? Because people have been with this franchise for a decade. So when it doesn't treat them right in return, as we've already talked about at length in this channel, then that's when people truly start to get really angry. It turns away from Stockholm Syndrome and it turns into a prison revolt. And to dive a bit more into that, basically because new experiences, especially ones that can be fine-tuned by players in Crucible Labs, those take significantly less cross-discipline resources than a map. And for them, that's the important bit, because cross-discipline resources don't exist within a vacuum. Anyone who's working on something for PvP is not working on something for the rest of the game, because ultimately, that shit's all the same tools, right? So basically, it comes down to one of the most important concepts I think anyone should learn, and that should be taught massively in schools. It is opportunity cost. Essentially, PvP maps are not worth the opportunity cost. That is the cost in doing the thing as compared to doing the other things you could do with that same amount of resources. Which to a lot of people, they then think, do you mean putting all your money into Marathon? And then obviously they don't feel good, because they feel like, oh, the money I'm supporting this game with is going into another thing that I'm not interested in. Sweet. Doesn't feel good. And actually, this thing of cross-discipline resources, that is why the PvPvE Gambit mode is now being made into something mostly optional, because they basically have acknowledged that, yeah, they haven't been talking about it at all. Essentially, following the Witch Queen rework, it simply did not generate the engagement with players, and that meant they could not justify spending resources on any form of grand overhaul. So now it's just kind of left to languish. So instead of giving it that big grand overhaul to maybe revitalize it, instead, they're just porting a map over that's already made, the Cathedral of Scars, as well as the addition of Shadow Legion and Lucent Hive enemy types. And with that, Gambit will no longer be required for ritual challenges from Season 22 onwards. Challenges requiring the mode will be reduced, and the matchmaking for the Gambit playlists will be combined. So in short, it's just, look, most of you aren't interested. It would take too much work to try to get you to be interested. That's too risky. We cannot justify doing it. And again, that's really frustrating for players. I enjoyed Gambit a lot. I enjoyed Crucible a lot when I was playing in Season of the Drifter. And because of this sort of thing, yeah, you can be guaranteed I'm not going to be interested in picking the game up, because that's stuff that I care about, that they are actively sort of divesting from. Now, the story unfortunately does go on. We move to the topic of armor rewards. This is one thing that players have rightly pointed out that they have acknowledged, is that they promised in 2020 to release a ritual armor set every year, and this actually did not happen. Now, there will be a new ritual armor set alongside the final shape, and an additional set for the Trials of Osiris event in Season 22. Those are still coming, but they're not out for players right now, and Bungie have explained why. They said that delivering ritual armor sets at rates we have in the past has become increasingly challenging, especially considering these sets have historically had very low adoption by players as both base armor and cosmetic ornaments. So very obviously here, the player sentiment has immediately latched onto the first part. Designing armor sets should be easy, especially when they can just be reshades. And of course, people look at armor sets, they look at the Eververse store and they're like, dude, you make armor sets all the time, what's going on? And don't worry, we'll get back to the Eververse store, because it's a fun, happy place. But it's the second part that really matters there. And that's because this game is a hybrid MMO, free-to-play, but it's not actually free-to-play, loot shooter. So in theory, framing the sort of low adoption of these sets is mirroring the PvP thing. They're essentially saying people don't use them, they're not generating enough engagement for us, resources shouldn't be spent on them. It's like saying, oh yeah, in Halo 3, recon armor, nobody gets that. That's just a plot point in the RB-in-Chief web series. We're not going to bother making that again. Twitch Press will be like, oh no, but that was like a chase item. We saw somebody with that and we thought, oh cool, you have that. No, doesn't really work like that, because again, everything is being ruthless. I think that's ultimately the thing. From a production standpoint, they are absolutely ruthless with how they manage opportunity cost, which is an important skill, but it's one that has got to be balanced with the needs and desires of your active player base, because at the end of the day, they're the reason why you're even doing the thing in the first place. But of course, there's a bit of a chicken and egg here thing as well. If Bungie are saying, hey, these ritual armor sets, they're just not worth, they're not really worth doing as much. Very low people, low number of people actually do them. A lot of people will then say, all right, yeah, but we don't feel incentivized to do these, because from their perspective, Bungie is diverting resources because they haven't made their own existing content appealing enough to do. Here's one from a Destiny player. Lol at the mention of ritual armor being a challenge because they have very low adoption by players as base armor and cosmetic ornaments. Maybe if they weren't ugly, people would care about it. And then they show here ritual armor, versus a paid cosmetic set. Paid cosmetic set is obviously the one that's trying to look awesome and cool and badass, which, again, whether it is like an Overwatch 2, legendary skin, or even Diablo 4 with its paid sets that actually lean into an aesthetic finally, it's just not that exciting. So basically, it's part of a wider sentiment here about free content in the game feeling thin in the ground compared to things that you buy. Now, of course, when I say free here, I am actually including content that's a part of the paid game experience. I just mean not microtransaction, like additional gear from the Eververse store. And then people think about resource, and it's like, oh, okay, you're not going to do that because the opportunity cost of making a really cool ritual set is that those same people aren't making an Eververse store set, and if they do not do that, you will not get the money. And that's why people feel nickel and dimed. And then the thing that's funny here is, people can talk about development tools. So this is actually really fascinating. It's GDC talk, right? From 2014 about what's called their mashup tool. It basically allows an artist to build a helmet in 20 minutes out of existing assets that is ready for skins. And you take a look at this here, you can see all the different building blocks for a helm, and you can see how an artist would be able to essentially kit bash all of those things together to make something new. And so for a lot of the community, this is a bit of a gotcha. It's essentially saying, hey, it's not like it's a terribly laborious process. You have good tools, you have a good pipeline, and even with that, you still can't justify things that aren't in the Eververse store. That is how it will feel to people. People are believing the resources are going to the things that make additional money, other than the money that is involved in buying the game every year and the season pass stuff. Because again, Destiny 2 is actually a really expensive game to play, and it is not free to play. Like, it's free to dick around in, but if you want to play the game seriously, you do actually need to pay. And of course, even, there's the whole dungeon key debacle, the kind of little battle pass within the battle pass that we talked about in the last video, all that craziness. Now, there's a bit of an unspoken thing here because the word Eververse actually does not appear in their state of the game document. So that Bungie are framing everything via player engagement is being interpreted by many people as them essentially blaming the player base, which I think is a hostile way to look at the statements, even though it is in a way literally true. It's like, you guys aren't interested in doing this, so we're not going to put resources into that. To which people then say, but I'd be interested if you put resources into it. And I think this is where I'd end up saying, like, fear knows no love. If you're always afraid, if you're not giving people a reason, you're going to be screwed. It's one of those things. People follow the numbers rather than make new numbers. A very successful revival of Gambit would maybe lead to better numbers, and maybe if they learned why the Witch Queen revamp didn't end up producing the results that they wanted, they could make the next big revamp actually be successful, drive new numbers, and make happier players. But I think the problem is when you're constantly optimizing and optimizing and optimizing around the things that work, well, I think you end up in a very hyper-defensive form of gameplay. And if your job ultimately is to, excite and to delight your players, you need big, exciting new things for them to actually engage in, rather than constantly playing defense and constantly trimming the fat and optimizing and optimizing and optimizing based on what your numbers say. Numbers are a guide. They teach you things. They, I think, mostly teach you what does and doesn't work. But from that, yes, some optimizations are fair. Yes, we can all understand not putting resources into one thing because they'll be better used somewhere else. But if you end up being too defensive over time, you end up with problems like this. When large portions of your player base have been underserved for years and years and years, and that's when the relationship turns toxic, because ultimately Bungie haven't really held up their end of the implicit bargain that is struck with their own players. It's hard for a player base then to look at the growth of the Eververse store and then also see Bungie continually talk about how they don't have the resources to make things. People instantly look at Eververse, see it full of things. Now, that's one of those things where, is that technically a fair comparison? Not really. I mean, the person who's making a new PvP map is probably not the person who'll be making a new armor set, but ultimately it's the perception that matters, and it's not like people... if your players are worrying about the allocation of individual teams in your company, that means you've got a real problem. Fundamentally, it's like, this isn't here, you're putting resources into that, we're unhappy. And Bungie can say, oh, but this, but that. And it comes down to, that's an explanation. It's not an excuse. And I think people end up being so tired of explanation of, hey, I get you have a problem. I'm going to explain why we have delivered this problem to you. That only holds for so long. And then all of this did lead to a thread that I saw got quite clowned on. Essentially, this is full of kind of trust me bro numbers and speculation and the sort of thing that, it's like, okay, personally, and he does say this is my biggest armchair moment of the thread, but let's make the assumption that a team of 20 devs dedicated only to Destiny 2 map making could crank out one PvP map per season. Now, the thing is, it's not like they have 20 mappers, and there's many cases where actually 20 mappers may not be a good thing. Too many cooks. There are certain parts of the design process where, more hands actually does not make it easier. One of the things that's hard about making multiplayer maps is, oh man, they are complex. Like, you look at a game like, say, CSGO, and just how perfect a map needs to be. Now, of course, that's the highest bar, similar for Valorant, I suppose. But Bungie to this would say, okay, so number one, that's not what our team allocation looks like. We don't have a dedicated map team. That's just not how the team is structured. We have a general content team who can make lots of sorts of things that does include maps, but those people who are making the maps will be making the maps instead of something else. Again, that matters to Bungie, doesn't matter to the players. So I think one of the things that's important here is, yes, I look at this thread as someone who's a little bit in development, but admittedly is nowhere near AAA development. I do know a few AAA people, and it's like, yeah, this is rife with, you can basically slice this thread to pieces with the amount of speculation. It doesn't count things like QA, which, has to be allocated for, and just a whole bunch of things. And I could try to explain in detail, this is wrong because of this is an assumption because of that, but it actually wouldn't matter to players. And I think that's the bit for those of us who are in the development space to understand. We look at something like this, and just because that's full of inaccuracies and is a bit wrong in many respects, that, yes, in a way it matters because it's not right, but the fact that it exists means that the version of this that is right is a problem for our players, and that's the thing that we need to think about. So that's why, quote tweeting this to Duncan the person, maybe it'll help make some things right or help educate people, but for actually meeting the, I don't want to say the demands of the players, but the hunger of the players, it won't actually help. And the more that I think we harbor sort of a great form of like, oh, look at these stupid gamers, they don't even appreciate what we give them, the more that like you harbor a sentiment like that, the more toxic your own mental headspace is going to be about your own work. And that probably will not, serve and delight players, which is actually what our job is. Yeah, that's also the bit. Like, our job is to make people happy and to make a product that they like, just to be real about it. So it's one of those things where there are significant problems in Destiny, and I think Bungie have spent a very long time giving explanations. And those explanations at the start were an okay excuse. People were okay about it. People thought, it's, you know what, we get it. They're only out of Activision for a year. They've lost High Noon and the other support studios. We gotta give them time. We gotta let them cook. But I think now that it's 4 years on, people are just thinking, we've been letting you cook for 4 years. Why is this getting more greedy? I thought Activision were the problem. Oh dear, maybe Activision weren't the problem. No, actually Activision were the problem, but they were a different problem, and now they've been replaced by a new problem. And it's quite interesting for Sony because Bungie are the supposed live service experts, yet here they are absolutely bungling stuff with their community. However, I say all of this as a player of World of Warcraft, and that is to say that many of us are indeed rats in Bobby Kotick's maze, and while this maze is no longer owned by Bobby Kotick, at the end of the day, will the people come back? Because even though Lightfall had the worst launch reception that I've seen in a very, very long time, it did hit peak concurrency in Steam. So from Bungie's perspective, if this won't truly hit them where it hurts, and they are capable of being, I suppose, so dispassionate and data-driven about player sentiment, then, will it really change anything? Ultimately, then, we'll have to wait until the final shape is revealed on the 22nd of August. I think never has something mattered more for Destiny. I mean, you could maybe say the Taken King kind of saving Destiny as a thing is what would matter more, but I think essentially, they're coming up to their big finale. They've utterly shat the bed with their community. this reveal, like, if there is a path forward, it has got to start with this. They're going to need to impress people, because ultimately that state of the game was about setting expectations and essentially letting people know why they're not having the things that they want. All the while, those people are thinking about people in Bungie who are partially being funded by Destiny revenue who are making a live service extraction shooter called Marathon. That doesn't feel good to those players. Ultimately then, Final Shape is saying this is what we've purchased with the dissatisfaction we've knowingly given you. That is a hard thing to accomplish. I do hope that it ends up being a success. Witch Queen reinvigorated that game. I saw so much positive buzz, so much positive narrative buzz, that ultimately brought a lot of joy and good times with friends to people, and that is utterly, definitely what I want to see happen for the Final Shape. I think for Bungie, your dev blogs are usually great in that they have detail, they talk about things a lot of other devs would shy away from. However, you can only let a problem exist for so long before explanation no longer does the job that you want it to. And to end on a Reddit post, if Bungie won't listen to us as a community, couldn't we simply pile up our bodies together, merge our minds into a being of collective displeasure, and then pursue them for all eternity? So yeah, I mean, watch out, Bungie. You may have things going on in like the astral realm if this gets too much worse. But hey, maybe that way they'll actually find out what the veil is. Which I think is an out-of-date joke now, but hey, you get the point. Have a good day. If you want to support what we're doing, also get our big old, chunky art book with lots of insights from our team, or even check out the Pale Beyond itself. Those links are down below. Have a great day. There will be a video out tomorrow, and I shall see you over there.